So, standing in front of you again, this time actually speaking, and we're going to look at OpenMetrics, which some of you have presumably heard about. We're looking at a bit more. I presume you largely know who I am. Among the list is that I'm one of the people for the last, 3 years now, who have been talking like once every 2 weeks about OpenMetrics to try and solidify this down. So, last year, Richie was standing up here talking about OpenMetrics. You see now? Okay. Julius is now happy. We'll remember this moment. So last year, as I said, Richard was up here talking about OpenMetrics. It was a lot of the theory about why we're doing it, but not what it actually is, and the actual details, which we have now almost completely worked out. So what I want to take you through is how it actually matters to you, and what difference it's going to make to you as Prometheus users and as part of the monitoring ecosystem more broadly. So a recap, which some of Richie covered in his Modbus talk, that the closest thing we've had to a metric standard is SNMP. And for its age, it's actually pretty good. The data model isn't that far off Prometheus. Like, it has labels, they're called tables. It has lots of problems which don't help it scaling. So it's very chatty and doesn't have windowing, which basically means it's slow. The fact that it is pull or push or whatnot is irrelevant. The fact it's very chatty without windowing. And there's lots of cases where vendors might be following like the letter of the law, like yes, that is syntactically a valid SNMP message, but why are you putting a float in a string rather than using the float standard, which was never standardized, unfortunately. And there's other weird stuff like, let's put multiple floats in there separated by commas, because that's definitely going to be easy to parse. So in many cases, you end up having to parse English, which is always fun because, well, I can't get a computer to parse English. I need to tell it what to do. And there's also various other various formats, like StatsD actually. That format's pretty popular. Graphite's popular. InfluxDB was there for a while. V1 or two, one of them. But otherwise, like there aren't really standard protocols that you're going to come across. Oh, did it? I didn't. No, it's working. Yeah. Yeah, I just didn't like those two words. So that's kind of a bit of a problem. But the good news is that Prometheus, and in particular its text format, became a de facto standard somewhere around 2 to 3 years ago, depending on where you count. Now, it's obviously hard to measure de facto standards. There is no standard for de facto standards, merely a de facto standard for de facto standards. But everyone's using it. Like, we've got all the main monitoring vendors can import this in some way, even though several of them are just via Telegraph, which then spits out Graphite or something, but they have an entry of here's how we input this. And there are, 500 plus exporters that we know of. That's just in the port list, which is the unofficial list of all exporters. So that means that monitoring systems, not just Prometheus, rather than competing on we have N integrations, can compete on, well, our UI is nice, or we support exemplars, or other things that are actually interesting, rather than stamp collecting. And that's good, okay? Because it means we can do more things and focus on the more interesting problems. And the introduction of labels is also pretty handy, even though they were kind of there with SNMP, but now it's a more standard thing that you don't have to guess the meaning of something as much. So this is good. And everyone in the room is well aware of how Prometheus format is nice. But there is kind of a problem with the Prometheus text format, and that is the word Prometheus. So if you're going to talk out to like a network hardware vendor or something, they're going to say, oh no, we're going to use that, that's proprietary. Or if you're talking to another monitoring vendor, not so much these days, but they're like, oh, but we're not going to touch that. Actually, there's still one vendor doing that. So recently. But, it's kind of hard because why would we support our competitors? So you don't want them continuously inventing their own things, which they like doing as well, because that kind of puts us back where we are, where everyone has to implement an integration with every possible third-party piece of software into their monitoring system. So the idea then, spearheaded by Richie primarily, was we take the Prometheus format and we then evolve it into a neutral standard working with engineers and people who care from other competing monitoring solutions. We're working together, really. I remember myself and Paul Dix last year we were talking. Like everyone told me we had massive beef with each other. It's like no, it's fine. It's all fine. It's perfectly valid technical decisions. Okay, so as it stands, there's a whole pile of companies. Like this is the old list from last year because I'm lazy. But the whole pile of companies are signed on saying yes, we will use this. So that's good. So in terms of the actual process, like how do you go about creating a standard? So largely we have video conference meetings every Tuesday. We cancelled this Tuesday because of this. And that lasts an hour normally. And we also had one in-person meeting in London maybe 2 years back. And over the years, because it's been years now, there have been people from Google, we've had SolarWinds, we've had InfluxDB, lots of different monitoring vendors represented at some stage or other because, oh, have you thought about this or that, or is this case covered, and so on. At this late stage, like, we're not encouraging additional attendees because the points we're talking about are very niche and corner, and it took us like 2 years just to get the idea of target labels across, and like using the word annotation is a great way to derail everything because it's like, wait, what type of annotation do you mean? Do you mean on a label name, a label value, a target, a particular event? Like, yeah, don't use the word annotation. So, at this point we're just doing there's like maybe two or three things we have to fully finalize, and they're very niche questions. So in terms of what the OpenMetrics standard does, there are lots of kind of warts in the original format for Prometheus. We'd like to kind of fix while we're at it. So the Prometheus format has 2 different ways of doing escaping. There's no way that's going to cause implementation problems. So we now have one way of doing escaping, because there's different rules for label values versus help. Not anymore. Spacing as well, it's all tightened up, so it's much smaller, tighter standard. It's allowing for nanosecond resolution timestamps. That was a request from InfluxDB. Apparently it's important in the financial industry. We also have support, in addition to float64, or floating point, int64. Because it turns out, if you have a 100 gigabit network interface, that matters slightly. Because on the other hand, if you are trying to measure, because like the 53 bits of mantissa you have in a float64, it's going to run out in like a day on a 100 gigabit network interface to try to measure bandwidth. On the other hand, it means that yes, it's now off by 10 bytes on something that's doing 10 billion bytes a second. So not the end of the world. But still, this is going to matter for some use cases, so int64 is for counters. Incidentally, talking about accuracy and so on, there were questions from yesterday's talk around data accuracy and so on, benchmarking. So I am currently running some benchmarks on Victoria Metrics, and I'll hopefully be able to share them later, because I know lots of people are asking questions, so see what the answers are. So aside from that, like, units are now explicit there, because the more metadata we can give to front ends like Grafana, the better, and they can do something with it. There's also a created for child creation. This is something that Google wanted from Stackdriver. And if you're aware of the issue of if a time series just appears as a counter, Prometheus doesn't know when that happened. This will let us know, and we may be able to get Rate to do something with this. So that'll be handy. There's also now a long-term issue is we want to know if the transfer was interrupted. So, like, if the HTTP connection just died in the middle and there was no content length on it, we can't tell, depending on exactly where it stops, we mightn't be able to tell it was interrupted, or if that was everything. So there's now an explicit end of file notation in there, so we actually detect that, because you do not want to have to try and deal with partial metrics. It's theoretically possible, but practically, you just can't figure it out. The math's too hard, because it's like, hey, we don't know what order it is, and a random pile of stuff is disappearing every time. Good luck. Or it failed. One of those much easier to deal with. We also have made optional the final new line, because that is probably the most common mistake that's been made in terms of writing a client library, is forgetting the trailing new line on the last line. So it's one place where we've actually made the spec a little looser, just because we saw that mistake being made so often in terms of the Prometheus format. And there were considerations in there for both push and pull. Like, it is agnostic. It's a transfer format with some extra considerations on top. So like for pull, and for top-down service discovery, we don't want target labels put in everything because that breaks things. But push kind of needs that stuff also. So we've kind of thought about all this stuff and how to make it work for everyone. All that. And there's also optional support for protobufs, which is kind of dropped out of Prometheus. Come back again in OpenMetrics. Now what's new, as has been hinted already and reiterated by Richie, is exemplars. So this is an example of this. You can see our new created is here. And here, after these buckets, you can see there's a hash, a label set, and a value. So this is an exemplar saying that, hey, in this bucket here, that number's too large. Anyway, I was looking at this number instead of that one. It's grand. Pretend it's a smaller number. But it's saying, hey, there's a 0.43 in this bucket. And this is the ID of the trace. So you can then go to Jaeger or your logs and whatnot and gather that back. And the same principle there. You can also have a timestamp here. And there are limits here to prevent people abusing it. But that's the basic idea that we're saying, yeah, in the less than 10 bucket, there's this, it's 2.7. Yeah, I'll fix that afterwards before I put them up. And otherwise, like you got your count and your sum and usual, and foo created, as I said, in seconds. So that's going to be pretty exciting. And as was mentioned as well by Gusum, there's a PR from yesterday adding support to actually parse the exemplars in Prometheus's internal thingy. Now, this is the important slide. How do you know that? It says it. Breaking changes. The big change that is going to bite people is that because we added this created thing, the current convention that counters ended in underscore total is now mandatory. So if you're already following this convention, everything's fine. However, for the rest of the world, which is a lot of people, you'll find that going through a client library will have added this underscore total for you in a nice transparent way. So be aware of that. The other thing, timestamps in the format are in seconds rather than milliseconds now, just for consistency. But timestamps are pretty rarely used, so I'm not expecting any impact here. The total is going to be the main thing, I think, for people, because as soon as a client library it starts supporting the OpenMetrics data model as distinct from the Prometheus data model, that's going to flip. So where are we today? Okay, this is obviously slightly out of date as of yesterday. So the Prometheus Python client is the reference implementation of OpenMetrics. So it's using the OpenMetrics data model internally. It's going to add your total if you haven't. So that's there. Prometheus, since for about a year now, will negotiate for OpenMetrics when scraping. So basically, if you have a recent Prometheus with a recent Prometheus client library, they're going to be speaking OpenMetrics to each other rather than Prometheus text format. And this is invisible to you. That's good. There are two kind of patterns we have for basically for handling strings in Prometheus that we've seen. The info metric, like Prometheus build info, and so on. And also enums, which actually I think kind of started in kube state metrics. They're now first-class features within OpenMetrics and the Python client. So you can just use them, and it's much more user-friendly than trying to do it by hand. Like particularly the enum, you don't have to worry about making sure only one of them is set, because that's now all being handled for you by the code, because I've written it once, you don't need to worry. And if you are going by the Prometheus text format, for whatever reason, it just gracefully downgrades. So yep, they're gauges instead of being info or state set. So you get the benefit of these new types and better API at the programming level, and you can still expose it to other stuff. And as well, the Python client's parser, it can be used to test exposition compliance because it is a very, very strict parser. Unlike the text format one in Python, which is, look, we guarantee we'll accept valid input. This one is, we guarantee we'll accept valid input, and we guarantee we will reject invalid input. Because it's the reference parser, it has to be strict. In terms of other implementations, Datadog actually supports ingestion of OpenMetrics because they're using the Python parser, and they've actually contributed quite a few performance improvements to the Python parser for OpenMetrics, as they did previously for the Prometheus format. So they got it like 3 times faster, which is always good to see. OpenTelemetry, as mentioned, it plans on supporting a pile of stuff, but one of them is it will support OpenMetrics exposition for metrics. There's a missing I there. Anyway, metrics. So you'll be able to use it together. Like there's a lot of confusion as to how OpenTelemetry and OpenMetrics interact and like they're complementary things. We're an output format, they're a tracing system that does logging and stuff. So we're just an output format largely. One thing I have noticed a fair bit, both while reviewing CFPs for KubeCon and whatnot and just generally online, is projects will talk about supporting OpenMetrics exposition, but they don't. What they're actually exposing is the Prometheus text format. Now, it's good that people are supporting the Prometheus text format, the more the merrier, but that's kind of confusing. So, I'm going to show you one way you can spot this here. So here we have Prometheus. Someone's following the convention, so it's foo seconds total as a counter, and it's foo seconds total and a value. So OpenMetrics, this unit here is called foo seconds, and the underscore total is a suffix. So the metric name here and here, like this is the metric name, the time series name, they're different for this counter. So that's one way to spot it. Like in Prometheus, it could just have foo seconds and it'll just be still foo seconds. Something else that'll typically be there, like it is technically optional, but the created time series is there. That's a good sign that at least the data model is OpenMetrics. And this unit is specific to OpenMetrics. So here the unit is seconds. Yeah, foo seconds has a unit of seconds. I can't see the underscores of where the things line up. So also you've got this EOF on the end to signal, yes, this is definitely it. I didn't get interrupted bid transfer. So if you kind of see unit and EOF and things are underscore total, you can be pretty sure that that is OpenMetrics rather than Prometheus format. Just so you know what you're actually getting. Like things should degrade gracefully, so it all should be okay, but best to name things what they actually are. So the standard, like because our goal is to become a standard, and you know it kind of probably feels that we've been locked in a room for 2-3 years and nothing's happened. Well, we use VC, so we're technically locked in several rooms. The basic text format spec is done, like the actual principle of the spec, and the proto is being looked at. In terms of actually writing a draft for the RFC, basically we're getting delayed by life. So obviously Richie is building his data center and having his own challenges there. In my case, for example, we thought we'd have a draft ready for this. Then my sister was kind enough to announce her engagement, and that she was getting married in 10 days' time. So anyway, one quick transatlantic trip later, yeah, that took it out of me, and then the shortened holiday with my girlfriend, and then I was doing gaming for 36 hours over 72 hours. That didn't do well for my health, so yeah, I'm still recovering from all that. So hopefully we'll get to it, but basically there's a lot of wordsmithing. We have all the decisions, they're all sitting in GitHub and in our extensive meeting notes. We just need to convert them to English and wordsmith it. So hopefully we'll get that soon in general. In terms of compliance testing, because like, well, as with Modbus, you want to actually test things work and are following the standards and the recommendations as well, they'll be with it, the considerations. The Python parser can be used to verify exposition, and then we're also, Rob is doing taking basically the unit tests for the Python parser and making that into a test as well for parsers. It's like, okay, you should accept this input, you should reject this one. Because one of the things we want to watch out that happened with SNMP is vendors taking liberties. So if we can at least spot things that are definitely wrong, and then there's other places where we can say, hey, we've noticed that all these metrics have the exact same label or the exact same prefix. Are you sure that's right? And that sort of thing to hopefully encourage people in the right direction. Like, it's not a violation of the letter of the standard, but we've clearly written down the spirit, or will have written down the spirit when life gets out of the way. So the next steps are, of course, to complete the draft RFC. Then we'll hopefully bring it to the IETF. We're looking to get more OpenMetrics support in more Prometheus client libraries. Probably one detail more we should do. Prometheus itself is considering some exemplar support. That's still technically true, because I haven't gotten a chance to respond to the PR for some reason. And of course, we're looking at, I think Grafana and Loki and so on are looking to use all this stuff, considering they're the ones working on this. You just told me, Goodman just told me that Callum was working on this stuff.
Sure, why not?
But yeah, like if we can get this sort of integration working all the way through, that would be pretty nice. So in general, when you are transitioning to OpenMetrics, I would suggest now you start getting underscore total in for counters, so you can control how that change goes out, rather than someone upgrading the Python client or subsequently Java or presumably Go will work the same way, so you can control that change rather than it happening by sudden. Otherwise, if you're using the existing client library, this is a no-op. Nothing for you to worry about. Now, if you're not using a client library or you're some third-party vendor, like the Prometheus text format is simple. That's one of its big advantages and why we built on it rather than something more compressed or complicated, is that you can just bang it out in Echo and Bash or whatnot. At some point, Prometheus is going to change its default presumption when it's parsing. Like if you don't send a content type, at some point we'll start presuming it's OpenMetrics rather than Prometheus format. So please set the right content type. Similarly, if you're trying to scrape things, at some point the client libraries will switch from giving you Prometheus text format by default to giving you OpenMetrics by default. So once again, set your accept header appropriately. So it's all just standard HTTP content negotiation. We'll have appropriate warnings before this happens. Like we were meant to send out a notice about this a year ago, we forgot. So it'll be at least a year from now. But get in your accept headers, make sure your content type headers are correct now if you're some third party who's not using one of the existing client libraries. And at that point, I'm going to open up for questions.
I'll give it to you. Is the standard already ready enough for the other client libraries to start implementing this new output format?
Yeah, there's like one detail around float representation has to be fully figured out. It's good enough for what's there, but yeah, like that's a detail that can be changed afterwards. It's also like while figuring stuff out for the Python client, it's better to have one client for getting those details right rather than breaking a whole pot of users. So like I'll do Java at some point, but there's going to be breaking changes, so I'll clean up some deprecated stuff while I'm at it.
Hi, are you aware of when Kubernetes metric server will transition to OpenMetrics standard?
Presumably once the format is added to client Golang and they upgrade. Like this is going to be seamless largely, other than the underscore total.
Thank you.
Maybe I missed this, but I think it was related to when you talk about content type and accept. Are you thinking about, is there actually explicit version numbers in the OpenMetrics, and are you considering that for future compatibility?
So the question is basically how we're going to handle forward compatibility. So yes, there isn't a version number. I think this is 001 or something, whatever version it is. It isn't standard. And the idea is that you have to be able to grade down, because part of the idea as well is that you don't want to have binary formats that require special parsing and everything. Everything should break down to a counter or gauge.
And so you'll send that, or there'll be an accept, you'll send it in the...
Yeah, accept, and it'll do up to this version. As the other thing to keep in mind as well is that there'll be far fewer parsers than there will be generators.
Hello.
Yep.
Is there going to be OpenMetrics client libraries, or is it just going to be the Prometheus client libraries?
I'm not sure we've fully settled as it stands. It looks like they're going to be the Prometheus ones. They might move to another org or something. And then OpenSense telemetry is also going to be a client library that supports it. And there's a question of like some features like Exemplars, like the Python client is the reference client, so it has to implement everything, and so on. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, like there will be client libraries. So yeah.
That was basically my question as well. So
Behind you.
Okay, I have another
Behind.
question.
Oh, go on.
Okay, I have another question. When you said you're looking for like Grafana and Loki to support them, I mean, what does that? What are you looking for? What does that mean?
Well, remember when Gutem had the picture with the clicky
So
thing?
it just means exemplars and things like that.
Yeah, exemplars. It's like the exemplars are there. Please use them.
Yeah,
and the
no,
stuff
definitely.
like the unit and so on. If you can use hints from that or whatnot,
Definitely,
like things like info and enum, it's like it's metadata. Prometheus has no use for it, but maybe Grafana can do some cool stuff.
Has there been any changes to the label formats?
No, exactly the same.
Are there limits on like length or number or anything like that?
No. There will be considerations against abuse, because well, we've talked about cardinality here as well, and I imagine most people here have seen what happens. Developers start off, it's like, oh yeah, why would we use this Prometheus thing? Then they discover labels, and normally within a day or two, whoever's running the Prometheus discovers cardinality explosions. So there's going to be extensive consideration sections going over this, and one of the other ones as well, one of the problems with SNMP is that pulling all the data can take 15 minutes if you're trying to walk everything, even using bulk walk and all that. And that's, like, yes, you technically support SNMP, but not in a useful fashion. So we're going to have strong recommendations of, yeah, this should take less than a second.
First, thank you for the initiative. It's really good to see something. Have you considered to make the help text mandatory too? Because as a user, it is often extremely difficult to figure out which metrics you get, and the documentation just sucks.
So there's no plans to make help mandatory, because people would just put dummy text and copy and paste anyway. Like in client libraries, Prometheus client libraries, we require you to provide it, but you can put in an empty string, because like if you're going to bypass it, you're going to bypass it anyway. So it will be nice, but you know, like hopefully one of the things, at least with Prometheus metrics, is the metric name itself should be kind of useful. Because if we can get that, that's a big step already.
Are there plans for message formats beyond text and protobuf?
No, it's like we keep it simple.
Oh, I mean, another one. Can we, has anyone discussed adding, source code locations for each of the metric definitions? Because I think that would be a really cool, thing you could link to.
So my opinion on that is, I see no reason the client library couldn't add that to the help text.
Right, yeah, that sounds reasonable.
Like, that's how I'd approach it. Like, maybe in a future version, it'll be additional optional metadata or something, but it seems like help text stuff for me. Personally, I just take the metric name and chuck it into Google.
Yeah, but the worry, right, is if people start overloading help text and embedding structured data in there, then it will quickly get out of hand.
Yeah, which probably puts recommended limits on help text.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, one of the things is you've only got one help text per metric. And there are length limits on how long the exemplar labels can be.
I think limits on that.
Hello?
I think limits on that would be reasonable.
Yeah. Tina's one there.
You mentioned that now it's going to support integers. How is it going to be differentiated if the value is supposed to be a float or an integer?
Well, if it's a float, at least in the text format, it'll have a decimal point. If it's an integer, it won't.
Okay.
And to be honest, Prometheus is going to treat it all as floats anyway. But there are other systems which can do better things there.
Thanks.
Yeah, far back there.
That's going to be fun.
Nice throw. Is there any implication to the remote read and write API for this? I mean, so as far as I know today, like the units, the help text, that's not actually transmitted in the remote protocols. Is that right?
There's no effect because this is just front-end stuff, which Prometheus, well, it doesn't completely throw it away, but we don't do much with it right now.
Right.
Like right now, the metadata API does have unit because I added it when I was adding the parser.
Okay.
So you can get it there. But otherwise, this is the same as help and whatnot today.
Okay.
Like, it's not in the WAL, so we don't have it.
You should
Gotcha.
talk to
Harold.
where is he? Josh and me, because we want to do that next.
All right. Yeah. Yes, please.
Yeah, so one question, will integer 64 be possible in Prometheus sometime, somehow?
We're not planning on.
Okay.
Like, the format will support it.
Yeah, so you stick with floating point
Yep.
internally.
Yeah. Like, there's no plans to change from that. And as I said, like, even if you are on a 100 gigabit network interface, being off by 10 kilobytes is not exactly the end of the world. And even then, like, the SNMP exporter, which is the only place this really comes up, already takes a modulus, so it doesn't affect people.
So the created metadata, does it mean that we will have twice as much data inside the TSDB now?
No. Like, Prometheus does not store any metadata inside its TSDB. It's like, there are questions, like, particularly with exemplars, we can't store that in TSDB because I've done the math. That's way too much data. So how we're going to work that out and how do you deal with it changing over time are big questions, which after we solve that, in my opinion, we can look at, okay, how does that work with remote write then? Like, Will they attach it on the fly? Do we send it sometimes? Do we send it not? Is it a separate API? Maybe they just pull it from the WAL and we write it there. Like, there's design questions there just to keep the bandwidth sane.
Thank you.
So I'm confused about the differences between OpenTelemetry and OpenMetrics and how they relate. Oh, great question. Let me answer that. Because that's one of the things where I'm answering. I'm the initiator. Okay, do you want to answer?
I already did. Were you not listening?
So the two main reasons why it isn't merging or anything. A, we have this huge installed base for Prometheus, so we don't want to just throw it away. That's what Brian answered. The other thing is we intend to maintain this for years and decades. Like if you have industrial stuff or you have switches or routers or something, it won't change all that quickly. From what Bogdan told me, he intends to have a lot more iterations and a lot quicker iterations within OpenTelemetry. So we are more for the long term and for stability, and he's more for moving quickly and breaking things.
Like, there are provisions in there if you want to go beyond Int64 or float 128 ever becomes a thing. There's space in there to allow that.
Oh, we're actually over time. Sorry. Yeah, I didn't see it, sorry. I was so busy throwing microphones at people.